بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. وبعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, marhaban bikum. This is our annual tradition to gather to review the Fiqh of Fasting. And we cover every year a broad review of the rulings pertaining to fasting according to the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. And our teachers tell us that when we learn these matters that are fard ayn, individually obligatory on us, it's important that we review them every 6 months or once a year at a minimum. Something that you've already learned, something that you grew up practicing, you should review once a year minimum to refresh your memory about the ahkam. And that's because this is obligatory knowledge that we have to know. And things come up in our lives and details emerge, and we need to learn these things for ourselves and for our families. So you don't see the slides if you're attending live, but we're going to send these slides out in the WhatsApp group for you to review with. Those who are watching through the live stream will see these notes and the slides. Our intentions for gathering tonight are, number one, to remember Allah Ta'ala through learning the deen. The dhikr of Allah is the dhikr that we know when we say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, or reciting the Quran, or things like that. But it's also dhikr of Allah to gather to learn the deen, to learn the rulings of the Sharia of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we gather with the intention of dhikr. We also gather with the intention of learning the commands of Allah Ta'ala in order to worship Him as He orders us. And that is because Inna Allah Ta'ala la yu'badu bil jahl. Allah Ta'ala is not worshipped through ignorance. A person may have a sincere intention to go north, but if they take the train going south, they're not going to get north. It doesn't matter how good their intention is to get there, without the knowledge of how to get north, they're not going to get north. Likewise, when it comes to worshiping Allah Ta'ala, whether salat or fasting or interactions, we have to know exactly what we're doing. So that is our intention, to gain fiqh in the deen, to gain a detailed understanding of the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told us, Man yuridillahu bihi khayra yufaqihu fid din. Whomsoever Allah wills good for, He gives that person fiqh in the deen, a deep understanding of the deen. So we gather for learning. And we gather to ensure that our fasting is sound and accepted. We don't want to be fasting in Ramadan only to find out later on after learning that our fast was unacceptable because of certain things we were doing out of ignorance. That's why we learned these things, to make our lives easier by knowing what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, so that our fasts are sound in the sight of the Sharia. And lastly, our intention for gathering is to convey this knowledge to other people, to convey it to our families and our loved ones. Not everyone's able to attend in person or through live stream. People have different circumstances in life, but if you're learning this, it is your duty to understand it and convey it to those under your care or those in your circle of influence. And this is one of the intentions of seeking knowledge. It is said that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah said that the sincere intention in learning should be to remove ignorance from yourself, raf'ul jahl, to remove it from yourself and to remove it from others. So if you learn with the intention of benefiting others, that is a sincere and a good intention. So that's what we intend as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the obligation of fasting in the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah when he says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. We hear this verse every year in Ramadan. It's something that most Muslims are familiar with. Allah Ta'ala says, "O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed for you," meaning it's been made obligatory upon you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that perhaps you will obtain taqwa. This is the general command of Allah Ta'ala to the believers to fast in the month of Ramadan. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, "Man sama Ramadan imanan wa ihtisaba, ghufira lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbi." Whosoever fasts the month of Ramadan with two qualities, in the state of iman, with sincere belief, and anticipation of reward, his or her past and future sins will be forgiven. And this is the obligation of Allah Ta'ala upon us. Imam Ibn Ata'illah talks about the nature of obligations and says, essentially, if it was left up to us to purify ourselves and put ourselves in a good state and without any obligations, we may or may not do it. We may just become lazy and say, no, thank you. But Allah Ta'ala, out of His mercy, has made certain things obligatory, things that the believer simply has to do because they're a believer. And in so doing, they are engaging in the process of purifying themselves. Allah Ta'ala did not leave it up to us. He gave us the opportunity by making it obligatory. So we learn the rulings of fasting by pursuing certain questions. And we have a number of questions we want to pursue tonight, so that we understand how to fast and what breaks the fast and what doesn't break the fast and all of these relevant details. And we're going to go a little bit over the time because we started late. The intention is to get the core issues that we're presenting tonight. And I'm bringing these details largely taken from a work called Hashiyat al-Tahtawi ala Maraqi al-Falah, the Hashiyah of Imam al-Tahtawi, an Egyptian scholar, upon the work Maraqi al-Falah by Al-Imam al-Shurumbulali, a Hanafi scholar. So we want to answer some questions. Number one, what is fasting? Linguistically, lughatan, and Islamically, technically. When does fasting become obligatory? Number three, who is excused from fasting and who is not? Number four, what are the stipulations or the conditions for a valid fast? What's the minimum standard for a fast to be considered sahih, valid in Sharia? Number five, what is the intention we bring in Ramadan and when does one make that intention? Number six, what are some recommended actions to do in Ramadan when fasting? Number seven, what does a woman do if her period starts or ends in Ramadan? Number eight, what breaks the fast and what requires makeup and expiation? And we'll explain these terms when we get through them. Number nine, what is the fidya, penalty? Number 10, what does not break the fast? Number 11, what things are disliked to do that are not haram, but they're disliked to do when fasting? And lastly, what are some of the spiritual dimensions of fasting? There's a lot to cover here. However, once you understand the basic principles of what a fast is, it'll all come together very neatly, easily, inshallah ta'ala. And the way we understand how this all fits together is to have a proper conception of what fasting is, to have a proper tasawwur. Whenever we learn these beginning issues, the first primary objective of the teacher is to convey the tasawwur, the conception of the issue, because they say, al-hukum an al-shay far'un an tasawwurihi. The hukum, the judgment on something is a branch of its conception, meaning you can't talk about something until you know what that something is. If a person doesn't know what one is and what two is, how can they tell you what 1 + 2 is? They have to know what one is first and then two, and then what plus is, and then they can tell you the answer. So we want to look at the definition of fasting first, and from that, everything fits together nicely. So the word fasting in Arabic, we call it siyam, or we call it sawm. And it is the way of the scholars that they always tell us the linguistic meaning of the word first, and then they give us the technical Sharia definition of the term. This is important because we're not just looking at the meaning of it in Arabic. Salat, for example. What is the meaning of salat in the Arabic language? Its primary meaning is dua. Does that mean you just need to raise your hands 5 times a day to do prayer 5 times a day? No, because salat has a linguistic meaning, but it also has a shari legal meaning, which is the salat that we all know, that has certain movements and things that we say that begins with the takbir and ends with the taslim. Likewise with fasting. Fasting in Arabic means imsak. It means to withhold or unconditional restraint. In the Arabic language, sawm is imsak, to just hold back and restrain from something. But according to the definition in the Sharia, in Islamic law, it is, and it's quite a mouthful, they say, it is refraining from entering anything in the body cavity, whether deliberately or accidentally, or engaging in intercourse from the true dawn, al-Fajr al-Sadiq, to the time of the sunset, accompanied with the intention of fasting from individuals who are permitted to fast. This is a very long definition because they have to include everything that makes fasting fasting while excluding what is not fasting. So we're going to break this down bit by bit, each piece of this definition. That is the definition of fasting. And looking at it individually, we see the first part of it is refraining from entering anything into the body cavity. That's number one. This means acts of entering food, drink, or medicine, or even things that are not customarily food into the normal body cavity, whether it's something typical or untypical, meaning it doesn't matter whether the person thinks it is a food or not. If they enter it into their body cavity, and this breaks the fast. So the body cavity, meaning the mouth, the nose, the anus, and these are called the manafidh al-mu'tabara, the areas or the orifices of the body that are areas where something could be entered into the body. Now, in the Hanafi school, the ear is not included. In the Maliki school, it is. So if you put medicine drops in your ear in the Hanafi school, you're okay. But in the Maliki school, that would actually break your fast. The Hanafi school says, no, the ear is not a normal recognized entry point for things, even if theoretically they could enter into the body, right? It's the same way that skin is not an orifice of the body that would be considered a normal orifice by which the fast is broken. For example, if you put on skin cream, does your body absorb skin cream? Yes, it does. Your skin is the largest organ of your body. It absorbs the skin cream. But just by it absorbing into your body, does that mean your fast is broken? No, because the skin is not a manfadh mu'tabar. It's not a orifice or a body cavity that is considered when we talk about fasting. We're talking about primarily the mouth and the nose. And then they include the anus or the private parts, but just because those are also orifices. So this is the first part of that definition. The key thing is that it doesn't have to be just food or water. It could be any other object. If it enters the body, whether or not it's a food. If it enters the orifice, it would break the fast. So entering the throat, the intestines, the stomach, by way of the nose, throat, private parts, these things would break the fast. So that's the first part, refraining from entering anything into the body cavity. Number two, whether deliberately or accidentally, right? Whether deliberately or accidentally, what is excluded in that definition? Deliberately is one thing. You do it on purpose, You purposely take something into your body through your nose or your mouth, or you take something into your body by accident. Is there a third one? There is. And that is doing it forgetfully. Because you can still be fasting even though you've taken water or food into your body. If you did it out of forgetfulness, your fast is still valid. So the definition is not going to include something that is done forgetfully. I mean, the fast is still valid. So he says, refraining from entering anything into the body cavity, whether deliberately or accidentally, or engaging in intercourse from the true dawn to the time of sunset. This means the true entering of the Fajr time to the entering of Maghrib time, accompanied with the intention of fasting, meaning you have to intend the fast in order to distinguish it from simply not eating in the morning. Many people wake up and they don't eat breakfast until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Some people engage in intermittent fasting, but they don't eat until 10 or 11. They eat within an 8-hour window. Are they fasting when they wake up? No, because they don't have the intention of fasting. So it has to have the intention, which we're going to talk about. If a person merely stayed away from food and drink when waking up in the morning, they would not be considered sa'im fasting because they're missing the essential ingredient of the niyyah, the intention. So they have to have the niyyah from individuals who are permitted to fast, meaning it's not enough for just anyone to do this. In order for them to have a valid fast, they have to be of the people who are permitted to fast. Who is not permitted to fast? Basically, a woman who is during her menstruation, or a woman who is during her nifas, her postnatal period of 40 days after birth. Those two types of people are not permitted to fast, even if they feel they have the strength to do so. They are missing that essential condition, that they're free of the hayd and nifas, the menstruation and the postnatal bleeding. This is the ta'rif of fasting, the definition of fasting. And it's on the basis of this definition that we understand the other issues that come up. Now, going on to the next question, when does fasting become obligatory? One may say fasting becomes obligatory in Ramadan. And yes, that's a correct answer, but we mean upon whom is Ramadan obligatory? It becomes obligatory upon every Muslim, male or female, who is sane and pubescent, meaning they are of full mental capacity, they are sane, and they are pubescent, meaning they are baligh, mukallaf, they have entered the period of puberty. Now they are legally accountable in Sharia. And in the Hanafi school, there's a very precise way of determining the period of puberty, like the other schools. They say the male child is pubescent when they experience a wet dream or ejaculation, and the female child becomes pubescent when she experiences the same or her menstruation. And if there's no signs like this, then when they're 15 years old, right? So if anyone is younger, pre-pubescent, can they fast? Yes, they can. They can fast. And Allah Ta'ala rewards them for their fast, but the fast is not obligatory. If they break the fast, they're not sinning. They're not doing something disobedient to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Okay, so who is excused from fasting in Ramadan? We said already that two types of people are not able to fast: menstruating women and women who are during their state of nifas, postnatal bleeding. They are exempt from fasting. They would make up those days, but they are exempt when they're in that period. Likewise, sick people are exempt from fasting. Does that mean that you don't have to fast if you have a little sniffle or if you have a mild headache? You can go ahead and break your fast? No, it doesn't mean you can break your fast so easily. By sick, we mean a person who is afraid that if they continue fasting, their condition will worsen or will be lengthened. And if that person based on prior experience or the counsel of a qualified Muslim medical doctor tells them that this will worsen their condition or lengthen the condition, then they are allowed to break their fast and they will make up those days. Likewise, breastfeeding or pregnant women are also exempt from fasting when there's a genuine difficulty and a genuine fear that through fasting they will harm themselves or the child in the womb, or they will not be able to produce milk and they don't have access to a wet nurse who can feed the child. And the ulama, they say that when it comes to determining this for a woman, she has to know herself. She shouldn't go into this state of thinking, I'm going to do it no matter what. Nor should she opt to avoid fasting just because she's breastfeeding. She should consider her state. Can she do it? Is it affecting her? Is it going to affect her child? Is there a legitimate fear? If there's no legitimate fear, and from her past experience, she knows she can do it without harm, she should go ahead and continue fasting. So this is somewhat conditional on her knowing herself and through prior experience or consulting with a Muslim medical professional. Likewise, a person who is traveling beyond 81 kilometers is exempt from fasting. Of course, there's some conditions there. You would have to, in order for you to abstain from fasting in Ramadan, while traveling, you'd have to leave before the Fajr time of that day. And it would have to be at a distance of 81 kilometers to be considered musafir. So there's some details there to consider. But in this day and age, who's traveling anymore? And even if you're traveling, it's either by car or by plane, it's recommended to keep the fast instead of breaking it. It is a ruqsa when it's difficult, but for most people, it's doable. All right, so now we're getting into the fast itself. Ramadan is coming upon us very soon. What are the shurut, the conditions or the stipulations for a valid fast? What are the things we have to ensure for our fast to be valid? The ulama mentioned number one, the intention. If you don't have an intention, you don't have a fast. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are governed by intentions. So when a person is beginning Ramadan, they have to have the intention. And we're going to talk about that shortly, what it means to have the intention. Number two, the person who is fasting has to be free of hayd and nifas. So this is for women. They would have to be free of menstruation and postnatal bleeding. And thirdly, the person has to refrain from things that break the fast from dawn to sunset. It's very simple. Very, very simple. You have an intention and you refrain from certain things that break the fast from Fajr to Maghrib. Very simple. So what does it mean when we say you have to have an intention? And when do you have to make that intention? The ulama mentioned that the niyyah is the determination you feel in your heart to do something. And this is needed for every day that you fast, even in the month of Ramadan. But what is the nature of that intention? And is it really possible for a person to not intend? Based on this understanding, it's really hard not to have the intention if you know what you're doing. For example, say you're walking down the hallway in your home, going to your bathroom, and you turn on the water in the sink, and you put your hand inside, and you begin to wash it and make wudu. If someone stops you and asks you, what are you doing that for? You would say, for salat. Because you know, you have a purpose in mind when you make wudu. So the intention is there, even if you haven't verbalized it. You don't have to verbalize it. You don't have to say, I intend to make wudu in order to pray Salatul Dhuhr 4 rak'ah, carrying out in the current time, lillahi ta'ala. You don't have to verbalize it. You know what you're doing. Likewise, when you stand and you call the iqamah, if someone stops you and says, what are you doing? I'm about to pray. Same thing with fasting. You make a determination that you're going to fast, and that determination doesn't have to be verbalized. but it's an intention that I'm going to get up, and I'm going to eat suhoor, and I'm going to fast Ramadan. And you have that in your heart every single night prior to Fajr. As long as you have that, you have an intention. And in the Hanafi school, there's even some leeway with when you need to have the intention. If you say you got up late, missed suhoor, and Fajr has been in, as long as you haven't broken your fast, the formulating of the niyyah can take place up until, or some hours later on in the day, as long as you haven't eaten anything. Basically, it's really hard to not have a niyyah when you know what you're doing. So this is the niyyah. It's basically from the maghrib of the previous night up until the Fajr time, or you could go even to the midday if you woke up late. The niyyah, you shouldn't have a waswasa about it. Don't think that you have to utter it verbally. You know what you're doing every single night. You know what you do when you set your alarm for getting up for suhoor. That's your niyyah. You already have it, inshallah. But this is important to mention because without a niyyah, our fasting is just staying away from food and drink without a reason. So we have a reason behind it. So say we had our niyyah in the evening. We've gone to sleep. We woke up. We are preparing the suhoor. Fajr has entered. We stopped eating. We are now in a state of siyam, an act of worship that is actually doing nothing. It is abstaining. That's the act of worship. What are the recommended things to do while you're in that state or to prepare in Ramadan? The ulama say that number one, the sunnah, the recommended sunnah is to have the suhoor, because the Prophet ﷺ said that suhoor contains barakah, his blessings, to have that, and it's recommended to eat it later rather than earlier. So if Fajr comes in at 4:30 in the morning, it's recommended to have the suhoor closer to 4:30 rather than say 2 in the morning. And when you break the fast, it is the sunnah to hasten to break it. It's not a sunnah to wait 20 minutes after the adhan or after you've prayed maghrib to break your fast. The sunnah is to eat it, to break the fast as soon as maghrib enters. And this is the basic sunnah that we have observing while we're fasting. Now, looking at the issues of fasting, there's particular concerns with women. And though this is addressed to women, husbands and males should know this too, because if you are married and you have children, you need to know these rulings to communicate them to your family in these sensitive situations. So the question is, what does a woman do if her period starts or ends in Ramadan? Now, there's some scenarios here. We can look at the scenario of the period starting at night. What does she do then? What does she do if it starts in the day? What does she do if it ends in the night or ends in the daytime of fasting? If the menstruation starts in Ramadan during the day, during the night, meaning any time from after Maghrib until Fajr, what does she do? She refrains from fasting the following day, and for the duration that she's menstruating, she takes note of how many days she was menstruating, and she will make those days up later on in the year. It's recommended, highly recommended, that she makes those days up before the coming Ramadan. If she does not make up those days before the next Ramadan, according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, there's no penalty, but she still has to make those days up. In the other schools, you'd have to pay a penalty for allowing the time to elapse past the next Ramadan. So simply, she doesn't fast during those days. But what does she do if the period starts during the daytime? She's fasting already, but the period starts during the daytime, meaning any time after Fajr, right up until the Maghrib time. If a woman's period starts at any time during the day, then that day's fast is invalidated, it is broken, it doesn't count. She will note down that day, she will have to make that day up and all subsequent days, and she will refrain from fasting for the duration of her menstruation. and this is very simple. When it concerns the start of the period in Ramadan, the important thing is for her to keep count of those days and refrain from fasting. That's really all there is. But when the period ends in Ramadan, there are some very important things to know for women. What should she do when the menstruation stops? It could stop during the nighttime, or it could stop during the daytime. And these are important differences. If the menstruation stops during the night, meaning anytime after Maghrib and before Fajr, she will take the ghusl, the purificatory bath. She will begin her obligatory worship, meaning she's going to offer those prayers that are currently in, and she will be obliged to fast the following day and the remainder of Ramadan as long as she doesn't have another period. That's very simple. But what happens if the woman's period ends during the daytime of Ramadan? So the day her period ends, she's not fasting, but it's daytime and the period ends. If it stops during the day, meaning anytime after Fajr and before Maghrib, she will take the ghusl. She will begin her obligatory salawat that she has to pray that are current in that time. And this is very important. She will act as if she is a fasting person until Maghrib enters. I'll repeat that. If a woman ends her period at Dhuhr time, she's not fasting that day. She takes the ghusl, she prays Dhuhr, she'll pray Asr, and she will act as if she's fasting, even if she was eating just before that. From the rest of the time after she purifies herself until the Maghrib time, she acts as if she is fasting due to the hurma of the month, the sacredness of the month of Ramadan. According to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, if a woman was to eat and drink during that time, she would be seen as sinful, not because she's broken a fast, she's not fasting, but because of the hurma, the sacredness of the daytime of Ramadan. This is something within the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's not in the school of Imam Malik, but this is something particular. So it's something that you should know. And it goes back to the question, I didn't mention it in the beginning. Why are we teaching it according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa? It is because of continuity, because the majority of our community are from India and Pakistan and from the regions where the dominant school of fiqh is that of Imam Abu Hanifa. So for the sake of continuity and consistency, we teach what is familiar, recognizing the validity of fasting according to the ahkam of any of the recognized schools of law. Okay? So having covered these things, we now come to the most important part of the fiqh discussion, which is what actually breaks the fast. If a fast requires an intention and being free of menstruation and postnatal bleeding and abstaining from muftirat, things that break the fast, we need to know what exactly are those things that break the fast, as well as what does not break the fast. Because these things are going to impact how we are making up days and whether we're doing things one way or another. And when the ulama talk about what breaks the fast, they say that there's two broad categories. Looking at all the things that can possibly break your fast, you think of food and drink, but the fuqaha say, no, you need to look at it from a different perspective. There are those things that break the fast and require you to make up the day later on, qada, and require you to engage in a kafara, an expiation. So there's things that break the fast which require you to do those two things, to make it up and pay the kafara. And then there are things that break the fast which only require you to do the makeup, the qada alone. So the muftirat are basically the same thing, but it depends on whether it's done on purpose or accidentally and so on. So let's look at those things that break the fast and require us to make up the day and to pay or to do the kafara, the expiation. The ulama say eating or drinking something humans would normally consume, and this consumption nourishes, medicates, or pleases the body in some way, or intercourse, regardless of ejaculation or not, or swallowing the saliva of one's spouse. They mention things like that because people are weird and they have to include all sorts of examples because fiqh is dynamic. There is an expiation plus a makeup. You have to make up that day, but you also have to make it up because this is done on purpose. If the person does it on purpose, I'm done, intentionally breaking the fast, they have to make up that day and they have to do the kafara because this is a major sin. This is a kabira from the kaba'ir to intentionally break the fast. Knowingly breaking the fast in Ramadan is a major sin. And it requires making up that day and it requires kafara, the expiation. What is the expiation? The expiation is fasting 60 days in the year without interruption, mutataliya, without interruption. That means you can't take a day off. And it also means that you cannot fast in a time where halfway into it an Eid would come. So if you fast a month before Eid al-Adha, you have to start all over again your 60 days because you can't fast on the days of Eid or Ayyam al-Tashriq. You would have to pick a time when there's no Eid and do it 60 days consecutively. This is, of course, a penalty for the sin of purposely breaking the fast. It's a very severe one. And the only exception for the continuity of days is for menstruating women. If a woman intentionally broke her fast, committed this major sin, and she wants to expiate for that sin, she would fast 60 days consecutively. Of course, in that time period, her menstruation will come. She will not fast during those days, but as soon as she is free of that and she purifies herself with the ghusl, she will continue until she finishes 60 days. This is in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. And if a person is unable to do 60 days as a penalty, then they say that the person would fast, they would feed 60 people their fill for 2 meals, or they'd feed one poor person to their fill for 2 meals a day for 60 days, or they give 60 people, poor people, half a sa'a, about 2.5 kilograms of food or grains or monetary value, or they give that in dates, or they give a poor person these things, one person, that for 60 days consecutively. Now, in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, you don't get to choose which one you do. You start off with fasting 60 days, and only if you're unable would you resort to one of the other options. And this is, in the Maliki school, you have the option, you have this ikhtiyar, but this is a penalty because this is a major sin that requires one to make tawbah. And inshallah, none of us are going to do this, but it happens in our communities and in our ummah, and that's why Allah Ta'ala has revealed these rulings in the Quran, and this is why the Prophet ﷺ has explained these things, because people make mistakes. Now, one person came to me a couple of years ago and they said, many years ago, I wasn't really practicing Islam, and there were several years where I wasn't fasting Ramadan at all. How am I going to do this, they said, because I calculated it and it comes up to 100 and something odd days of broken fast. So that's going to be 100 odd days times 60. They were under the impression that for every day they intentionally broke their fast, they would have to fast 60 days for that one day. And that is not correct. If a person has broken many fasts in the past, they have to make tawbah and they have to make those days up. But their expiation, their kafara, is a single set of 60 days for all of those previous fasts that were missed, not 60 days per day that they missed of fasting. This is important to clarify. So that is what requires you to make up the fast and to pay the kafara. Essentially breaking the fast on purpose. You know what you're doing, you know it's haram, you do it anyway. May Allah protect us. But this is important to know. What requires, we'll pause for the adhan, inshallah. Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. شلون محمد رسول لا حول ولا قوة لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله لا حول ولا قوة لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين. Bismillah. Okay. So we talked about what requires qada, making it up, and the kafara, the expiation. Now we want to talk about what requires only makeup, only that you make it up later in the year after the Ramadan is finished. And this is going to be common. And this is what we should focus on. Basically, what requires makeup only includes eating or swallowing anything like, they say, raw rice, flour, a mouth full of salt, or toothpaste, or things like that. If it is swallowed, or accidentally swallowing water during wudu, or accidentally having water enter through the nostrils when taking a shower, where it reaches past the throat, or eating on purpose after you ate forgetfully. This is the person who forgot their fasting. They took a bite, and then they ate purposely after that, thinking, oh, I ruined my fast. Well, you could have kept fasting. You just ate if you forgot, but now you've eaten purposely. But it wasn't done purposely breaking the fast with the intention of breaking the fast. You thought that you broke it by accident. You have to make that day up, of course. Breaking the fast because you thought the sun had set when it has not. So say the Maghrib is at 7:45, you think it's 7:45, you think the sun is set based on what you've seen outside, you eat a date, and then you go and look at the time and you realize there's still 3 more minutes or 4 more minutes left. You are still supposed to be fasting and you broke your fast early. But it wasn't intentional. You didn't purposely break the fast to be disobedient to Allah, breaking it in the daytime. So you have to make the day up. You're not sinful for this. Likewise, if it was in the time of Fajr, the time of Fajr had entered and you're still eating, you thought that it was not yet in, that's an error. That's a mistake. It was done accidentally or non-purposely. So it's not the same thing as purposely breaking your fast, but you still have to make that day up. So an example of this is really common. A person goes into the shower, taking a shower before work, they're fasting in Ramadan, and they lift their head up and they're washing their hair, and the water goes into their nose and quickly reaches their throat, and it's down their esophagus. Did they do that on purpose? No, they didn't intentionally do that for the intention of getting water into their body. But at the same time, They didn't take the adequate precautions. It's not like they forgot. They did it and it went into their bodies accidentally. This is different from doing something out of forgetfulness. Forgetfulness is forgetting that you're fasting and putting something in your body. The accidental one is doing something while you know you're fasting, you're aware of your fasting, but it still enters your body by way of an accident. That requires a makeup. And this is why we say, the ulama say, that it's disliked to brush the teeth with toothpaste during fasting. Because not because toothpaste is going to break the fast, because it's only on your teeth and in your mouth. The problem is most people will spit that out, but there may be elements of that within their mouth that they will swallow, and this will be done accidentally, entering something in their body that would break the fast. So to avoid that, the precaution is we avoid brushing the teeth with toothpaste, unless we're absolutely sure we can rinse the mouth without any toothpaste remaining by the gums or behind the teeth or anything like that. They say, for example, smoking will break the fast. Obviously, you're entering something into the body. But here it's not intentionally smoking. It's smoking or inhaling smoke that you produced, such as burning incense. So the difference here is if you are walking through a space where, say, an incense stick is burning, you smell it. So you breathe it in that sense, but you're just walking by. That's not going to break your fast. But if you are inhaling it and you're near it and you purposely bring it into your body, you're not intending to break your fast, you're just intending to smell it and it gets into your body. That is accidental. And in the Hanafi school, that would break the fast. And eating a pea-sized or larger amount of food that is stuck in the teeth. They say pea-size or chickpea size, the chana. If that is something stuck in your teeth, in between your teeth, and if it's the size of a chickpea or larger, that is a substantial amount of food, enough to break the fast. But if it's less than that, such as a sesame seed or the piece of a peppercorn or something very minuscule, if that piece is stuck in the teeth and a person later swallows it without realizing it's there, and they even taste it in their throat, that will not break the fast because it is such a small amount. It is يصعب الاحتراز منه. It's very hard to take precautions away from those tiny amounts, as opposed to something that's larger, like a chickpea or a piece of something larger that would be stuck in the teeth. And frankly, if you don't realize there's something that large in your teeth, you need to maybe consider your dental hygiene. But they mention this because we have to understand dawabits and guidelines of what breaks the fast and what does not break the fast, and so on. But again, in all of these cases, if the person is swallowing something or bringing something into their body that's larger than a chickpea, for instance, they are not purposely breaking the fast by putting something into their body. It's there and they know they're fasting, but it goes into their body accidentally. So the ulama say they're not sinful because they didn't intentionally break the fast by purposely eating, but because they were aware of their fasting and this happened while they were fasting accidentally, they will continue the fast and they will make up that day later on. So, most people just need to know these basic things and not worry too much, because most people avoid these kinds of things. They brush their teeth before Fajr time, alhamdulillah. Continuing with what would require a makeup, qada, but not a kafara, they say performing an enema or dripping any liquid into the nose or ears where it reaches into the body verifiably. If a person drips it into the nose area here, but it's not reaching past the throat, that's different. That's such as putting water in your mouth and in your nose in wudu. You're not sniffing it to go to your throat. It's just into your nose. That's not going to break the fast. But if it enters the nose orifice and goes beyond that into the throat, that will break the fast. This is why the Prophet ﷺ guided us to not be so forceful when we bring the water into our nose during the wudu in Ramadan when fasting. You bring the water into the nose lightly. You don't sniff it forcefully to the point where it goes into your throat and beyond. That would break the fast. Swallowing water by accident when gargling for wudu or ghusl, that would break the fast, as we said. An exception to this is the leftover water that would remain in your mouth after wudu. Think about it. You make wudu, you're taking water into your mouth, right? Madmadma and istinshaq. You're bringing it into the mouth and you spit it out. Of course, there's going to be traces of water left over in the mouth, but this is ma'fu anhu. It's pardonable because it's such a minuscule amount and you can't really get all of that out. You're not asked to spit everything out of your mouth and dry the insides of your mouth. This is not what we're asked to do. So that amount is pardonable. It is accidentally swallowing the water that you're gargling in the wudu. Likewise, deliberately vomiting a mouthful or more, regardless if one swallows it or not. You have to make up, that breaks the fast. You have to make up that day. And engaging in intercourse forgetfully and thereafter thinking that the fast is broken and to deliberately have intercourse again. You know, this happens not just with intercourse, but with food. A lot of people have this mistaken notion that if they forgetfully eat, that their fast is ruined, and they go ahead and complete the meal and have lunch and dinner later on. And they get their protein drink in the daytime and have tea because they think, oh, I forgot, I accidentally broke my fast by forgetting. If you forgot and you remembered while you're eating, you put the food down, you put the drink down, and you continue fasting, and you don't make the day up. But if you forgetfully drink something or eat something, and then you remember, oh, I'm fasting. If you think at that moment that your fast is broken and you continue to eat, well, you have a ta'wil qarib, you have a reasonable faulty interpretation. You're not sinful, but you have to make that day up. And you should know this, that if you forget, you continue fasting. You don't stop. And the most common time this happens is in the beginning of Ramadan, when a person hasn't been used to fasting for a while, or for people who are cooking iftar. This is true, is it not? You're cooking the iftar, and what happens? You want to taste the food to make sure it has enough salt. What do? You go to the young child who's not fasting, you say, can you tell me, is there enough salt in this? Or you hold off on the salt until after, and then you add as needed. Okay? So there's the question of fidya as well. We talked about what breaks the fast and what requires the makeup and the penalty versus what only requires makeup. There's also this concept called the fidya, which is an expiatory payment. Now, in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, it is a form of charity given to a poor person where one has to pay for each day of their missed fast. However, in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, this fidya is not like the fidya within the other schools of law. Because in the Hanafi school, the fidya in Ramadan is only paid by a person who cannot fast at all whatsoever. And this is the person who cannot fast in Ramadan at all. They cannot make up for missed fast even later on after Ramadan. And they are not expected to ever regain the health and strength that would enable them to ever fast again. This is that person who, as much as they want to fast, they have a medical condition. And the doctors tell them, listen, you cannot fast at all. And more than likely, you're never going to fast again. This could be a person who is elderly, who may have some chronic conditions. Maybe they have diabetes or other conditions that prevent them from fasting at all. That person and that person alone, who cannot fast in Ramadan at all, who cannot make it up after Ramadan, and who is not expected to ever be able to fast Ramadan in the future, only that person pays the fidya. And people who will be able to later on, they make up their fast. They don't pay fidya. Now, in the other schools, it's a little different. The fidya would be paid for missing fast, or if the fast is not made up and the next Ramadan comes in, you'd pay fidya for those days. But in the Hanafi school, it's only paid for people who are completely unable to fast. And there are people who, as much as they wish to fast, they're unable, and they're often very saddened by this. One person came to me a couple of years ago, and they wanted to know what can they do because they feel they're missing out, because they want to fast, but they cannot. Medically, they simply cannot. And they were crying. And I said, Allah Ta'ala has legislated for you a way to receive the blessings and openings of Ramadan, even though you cannot fast. Do not think that because you cannot fast due to a medical condition, that you are denied the blessings of Ramadan. Because the one who obligated you to fast in Ramadan is also the one who has tested you with that condition and who has given you the opportunity to pay this fidya to assist the poor and feed the poor who are fasting. And you get the reward of feeding those people who are breaking their fast. You do not lose out. Allahu Kareem. Allah is generous. So this fidya is for people who are simply unable. And basically feeding a poor person, basically half a sa'a or of foodstuffs that's local to their area. And in the Hanafi school, you can even give money to this purpose. I recommend people, it's good to do things locally. I do believe that we should not send all of our money overseas exclusively. We should also do things locally. But if you can diversify the payments, some locally and some internationally, find those relief organizations that are collecting money that will go towards purchasing the food in those quantities that will be given in the equivalent amount for the fidya for poor people in different regions. Because the US dollar has more buying power in those regions, you can actually feed more people with what you send. But it's also good to do it locally. Now, when the ulama talk about what breaks the fast, they also are very careful to mention what does not break the fast. Because most of the questions that the scholars get about Ramadan is about whether XYZ breaks the fast or not. And right now, the most common question I've been getting in the lead up to Ramadan is the question of whether or not getting the vaccine will break your fast. But in order to answer that question, let's go back to the definition of fasting. The definition of fasting is purposely restraining from entering anything of food or drink or substances into the body cavities, al-manafidh al-mu'tabara, from the time of the true Fajr until Maghrib, accompanied with the intention by people who are allowed to fast. Now, looking at that definition, notice that it says purposely restraining oneself from entering into the body cavity, al-manafidh al-mu'tabara, the orifices of the body that one would enter something into. Now, is the surface of the skin an orifice or a cavity from which food or drink can be taken that would break the fast? No. Even if the skin would absorb something, it would absorb lotion and cream and anything like that, but it's not a proper orifice of the body from which these things are entered. And that means that if you get a shot, even though a substance is entering your body, such as a vaccine, or even insulin for that matter, if it's entering through the skin, the epidermis, that is not a recognized orifice of the body or cavity, and that would not break the fast if you got the vaccine during the daytime of Ramadan. The only question, and this is something within the four schools of law, there's some area of debate, is whether getting the COVID test would break the fast or not. Because in the Shafi'i school, school of Imam al-Shafi'i, if you enter something through one of the cavities and it passes the throat or passes past the nasal passage, it would break the fast even if you took it out, which would mean, I don't know how these tests are administered. They're scary to me. I wouldn't want one. But from what I hear, if it goes past the throat or goes past the nasal cavity and is taken out, it would be as if something entered the body and was taken out. According to the Shafi'is, that would break the fast. According to the others, that would not. But that's the only area of concern. Now, looking at it from a more broader fiqhi perspective, the things that do not break the fast in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa is eating or drinking something forgetfully. Forgetfully. What's the difference between forgetfully and accidentally? When you do something accidentally, you are aware in that moment that you're fasting. But the substance enters by accident. So a person's in the shower and they know they're fasting as they're showering, and they accidentally tilt their head up too high such that water enters their nose through the nasal cavity and down the throat. When that happened, they were aware they were fasting and the water entered past their throat, but it was an accident. They will have to make up that day because it was an accident. Likewise, eating what is between the teeth, if it is less than the size of a chickpea, we said already that doesn't break the fast. If it's a piece of a peppercorn or a sesame seed, something small like this, if it enters your throat and you swallow it, that won't break your fast. Likewise, dust or smoke, including smoke from incense, entering one's throat without one's doing. And this is like the person, again, who's simply walking in a room where there's incense and it enters the nose, but they weren't purposely trying to inhale it, as opposed to the one who inhales it on purpose. Likewise, a mosquito, a fly, or any other object entering the throat without one's doing. You know, and I was talking about this one issue with the shabab, and I said, you read this and you wonder, how could that ever happen? But I tell you, it happens. The strangest of scenarios happen, and that's why they are mentioned in the books of fiqh. It happened to me in Yemen one time. I was in an Arabic class with my teacher, and he was asking me to read something. And I was reading it, and as I opened my mouth, a fly flew into my mouth, and I coughed it out. And I realized from then, yes, this is real. These scenarios actually happen in real life. If I was fasting in that moment, and God forbid I swallowed that fly, my fast would still be valid because it was not my doing. So that applies to anything entering your mouth or your nose that was not your doing, right? Likewise, swallowing 1 or 2 drops of sweat or tears that enter the mouth and mixes with one's saliva. So you're sweating or you're crying and the tears or the sweat enters your mouth and it mixes with your saliva. That will not break your fast if you swallow it on the condition that you do not taste its saltiness. This is what they mentioned. They mentioned this qaid. If you taste the saltiness, they would say that would break the fast. You should avoid swallowing these objects. But the chances of that happening are very slim. Likewise, if you swallow your own saliva, that doesn't break the fast. If a person simply has saliva in the mouth and they're fasting, it's okay if they swallow it. It's no problem. Likewise, if they're clearing their throat and they have the phlegm, the balgham, if they swallow that after they've coughed it up, no problem. It won't break the fast. Likewise, swallowing vomit that enters in the mouth, whether without one's doing, even if it's a mouthful. This is when a person eats something too spicy or they have acid reflux and they may belch and something comes back up. If they force that back down, that's okay. This will not break their fast. This is opposed to a person forcibly vomiting more than a mouthful and swallowing that or not swallowing that. That would break the fast. Using a miswak or a toothbrush is fine, provided you don't swallow the toothpaste. And again, you have to be very careful with that. Wetting one's lips with saliva while speaking and swallowing it, that's fine. And swallowing blood that exits from the gums. And here they say that you have to be careful because it depends on the preponderance, the proportion of blood to saliva, the blood to saliva ratio. If a person is brushing their teeth in the daytime of Ramadan, for instance, and they have bleeding gums, if the blood is less than the saliva and they swallow that, it doesn't break their fast. But if the blood is more than the saliva, and we're talking a lot of blood now, and they swallow that, that would break the fast. So we're talking about the average blood that would emerge from within the gum line when a person brushes their teeth if they have bleeding gums. If that is swallowed with their saliva, saliva preponderates. That's more than the blood. That won't break their fast. Sniffing up mucus, for example, in the nose, applying surma, kuhul in the eyes, even if that goes into the nasal passage later on and a person gets that into the passage, doesn't break the fast. Water entering the ears from a bath, or rubbing oil or cream on the body or hair, applying deodorant, withdrawing blood, right? Like a blood test, that's fine. That won't break the fast. And if you get the hijama, the cupping, that won't break the fast either. You're not entering anything into your body. It is disliked to taste and chew things without an excuse, provided you're not swallowing the flavor of that thing. It's disliked to chew flavorless gum. It's also disliked to kiss one's spouse with desire, with shahwa, right? When a person fears that it may lead to something else, they should avoid this altogether. It's also makruh to sniff the water in the mouth, in the nose excessively when making the wudu or the ghusl, or to do things, it's makruh, disliked, to do things that would significantly weaken your body while you're fasting, such as cupping or withdrawing blood. Because it's feared that if you significantly weaken your body, you will be in a state where you feel you have to break your fast. And you didn't need to do that. You didn't have to put yourself in that situation, but you did, and now you feel forced to. You have to wait it out. So you should avoid putting yourself in those situations. That would include, for most people, engaging in strenuous exercise during the daytime of Ramadan. And some people who have an exercise routine will do it after they break the fast, depending on the time of the year. Some people, they know their bodies and they know they can do that. They do it perhaps early in the morning or an hour before iftar when they have a little bit of time to wait, when they then break the fast, hydrate themselves. But if a person knows that by working out strenuously, they may put themselves in a state of dehydration where they feel they have to break their fast, that is makruh. Don't put yourself in that situation. Be cautious. Brushing the teeth with toothpaste or using mouthwash while fasting is seen as makruh in the Hanafi school on the condition that one does not swallow it. If a person swallows it, of course, this will require them to make up the fast. This is the basic overview of the fiqh of fasting. We didn't talk about other issues outside of the individual act of fasting for the person, such as the moon sighting or things of that nature. We're talking about what constitutes a valid fast for a legally responsible person. What is required, what breaks the fast, what does not break the fast, what they should be abstaining from. What we've presented is a very cursory overview of what is mentioned in the books of fiqh. And what we've talked about constitutes the fard ayn aspects of fiqh al-siyam, the law concerning fasting, not just in Ramadan, but in any other fast, whether it's an obligatory or sunnah fast. Now, of course, the fasting in Ramadan is not just abstaining from food and drink. We're going over the time, so that's because we had technical difficulties. But beyond the abstaining from food and drink, there's abstaining from other things too. And these are the higher levels of fasting. You see, in fiqh, in Islamic law, the fuqaha are only looking at the outward standard by which a thing is judged as valid. So the faqih will look at the salat, the person having the niyyah, the person uttering the takbir, reciting the Fatiha, another surah, the ruku', the rising from ruku', the sujood, the tashahhud, ila akhirih. They'll look at it outwardly and determine that this is outwardly a valid salat, salat sahiha. They are not looking at the inward dimensions to say, because you can't measure those things. The fuqaha are looking at what is measurable. But there are aspects of fasting that are immeasurable that affect our fasting. And these are the other aspects or the higher levels of fasting. Fasting with our tongue from backbiting and gossip. Fasting with our eyes from looking at the haram. Fasting with our ears from listening to the haram. And even higher than that is fasting with our eyes from things that simply preoccupy us from more important things, or listening to things that are permissible in themselves, but they preoccupy us. And then you have fasting the heart, which is to abstain from everything, imsak, from everything that distracts you from your Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ramadan is training us through the act of self-discipline, teaching us in this month that we can take those lessons and apply them to every other day of the year. What we have described is the bare minimum, the minimum standard for a valid fast. And it's on this minimum standard that we build on with the fasting of the tongue, the eyes, the ears, and ultimately the heart. These are some of the objectives of fasting, not just to leave off food and drink. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man lam yada'a qawl az-zur wal amal bihi." Whoever does not leave false statements and false witness and acting on it, Allah is not in need of them leaving their food and drink and going hungry. Allah does not need it. Allah does not need our fasting. So we have to fast beyond simply abstaining from the food and the drink. And this is why there are higher objectives of fasting, of training the soul and disciplining the soul and cultivating taqwa. But this is the foundation, because the Prophet ﷺ describes Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And think of it like 3 steps. Ihsan is the spiritual dimension. Islam is describing the outward dimension. What we've been talking about tonight is the outward dimension of fasting, the fiqh. You cannot skip the first step to get to the 3rd step. You cannot fast with your eyes and your ears and your heart if you don't know how to fast with your body. And this is where we start. And from this, we then develop fasting on the higher levels. So we remind ourselves of our obligations. We're also committing ourselves to fasting on a higher level. And that's why we should set some reasonable goals of reading Quran, of cutting certain habits, even if they are lawful, or even if they are perhaps in the gray area. That means if you're watching Netflix here and there the rest of the year, cut it out in Ramadan. If you're listening to music, regardless of the ikhtilaf, the difference of opinion among the ulama about it, give it up in Ramadan. If you are engaging in this and that, give it up in Ramadan. You have to isolate the senses, fast with the senses as you're fasting with your body from food and water and these things. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us fiqh in the deen and understanding, and to allow us to reach Ramadan in the best of states. And inshallah, we have this understanding, knowing what we're supposed to be doing as servants. Wallahu a'lam, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi. Yes, so before you came, I was answering the question. So in the definition of siyam, we said what? In the ta'rif of siyam, it is purposely avoiding taking into the body what? From where? The orifices, al-manafid al-mu'tabara, things that would break the fast. The epidermis is not a manfad mu'tabar, because just like if you put lotion on, your skin would absorb that. That doesn't break your fast. Likewise, the vaccine entering through the epidermis, through the skin, it won't break your fast, inshallah. Right. Inshallah.
Should a woman act like she's fasting after she takes ghusl, or should she continue to act like fasting if the cycle starts with withdrawal?
Can you repeat the question?
So I think we covered when the cycle ends,
Mhm.
she takes ghusl,
Mhm.
and then she should act like for the rest of the day.
Oh, the question is if it starts, she's fasting and it starts.
So after that, should she continue to act like it's a fast?
I don't know. In the Maliki school, one is allowed. In the Hashiyat al-Tahtawi, I don't recall him mentioning this, because the one issue is she starts each day when she's in her period. She wakes up in the morning, it's day 2. She's not going to eat, even if it's Ramadan. So if she's going through the day and she's in her hayd, and it just so happens she attains the tuhur, then she stays away from eating because she's in tuhur and she recognizes the sacredness of the day. But this is kind of the reverse, isn't it? Yeah. So, anything else? Khair. طيب. So we're going to put the slides up on the WhatsApp group for your review, inshallah. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me privately if you have anything. It's fine. Or we'll put it on the website, inshallah. Khair. Okay. صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.